So, Pete, what's the most common mistake that AEC leaders make when they're shifting from the traditional management of more of like a me management as opposed to a team-driven leadership approach like you talk about in the book?
Well, I mean, the first sort of flaw I see is thinking that we really understand teams, what it takes to design and operate successfully with teams. There's just so many different components, and and there are elements that, oh, I've heard of that before. Yes, but now apply it. And so there is this sort of, if we approach it with the, just do it like I did it before, just do it like we did it before, it's not.
The leadership model in AEC firms traditionally has been very top-down management. But to really succeed in today's climate, it's critical that you have team success. Teams need to operate at a high level. And my guest today, Peter Atherton, a licensed professional engineer, is going to tell us exactly how to create team success. Pete is the founder of ActionsProve, and he's the author of the new book, Next Level Leadership: How to Build and Leverage Your Essential Team Success Ecosystem. In this episode, he talks about how we can build teams the right way and support them with systems. And he's also going to talk about how firms need to think differently and they can't go through traditional strategic planning processes anymore. I'm Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast. Let's dive in. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Peter Atherton is a licensed professional engineer. He's the president and founder of ActionsProve. Pete, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Well, great to see you again, Anthony, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, Pete's been a guest before on several of our shows, and we've done a lot of work together. Our companies have been doing some research and putting out the Future of Work report, which we've been really excited about getting again into this year. But today we're going to focus on another topic, which is leadership, which is obviously the main focus of our podcast here. We're going to talk about Pete's book and some interesting parts of his book, Next Level Leadership, which I read, I really enjoyed. We're going to walk through it. But Pete, before we get into that, for those listeners that don't know you, maybe you could talk a little bit about yourself and kind of your career journey to date.
Sure. Well, currently leadership and management consultant, very broadly, very specifically do a lot of strategic planning work, not traditional strategic planning. So not a traditional management leadership consultant. I really work upstream in terms of what I call strategic firm design, and really downstream in terms of strategic firm advancement and different techniques to be able to do that, to get away from the 90% of strategic plans and strategic planning initiatives languish and fail. Because what I sit on now is the last 7-8 years doing this consulting, leadership management consulting, was it sits on 24 years of being a practicing civil engineer, principal, and the majority of that 24 years also being a major owner of an engineering firm. So I've been on all sides of leadership and strategic firm success.
Yeah, and I think that's why Pete is able to contribute so much on the topic of leadership in AEC, because he was a leader. He was at that position in a company and understands kind of both sides of it, which is why I think a lot of the content that Pete puts out there, including his own podcast, has been really helpful in this regard. So Pete, what leadership challenges in our industry, in the AEC industry, kind of motivated you to write Next Level Leadership? Talk about that. I always like to hear about the origin story behind the book.
Well, I mean, first of all, everything starts with leadership. I mean, everything that's really good and great, even sustainable in an organization, and never happens by accident, is always really intentional leadership behind that. And it is something that, not to be a buzzword, there's a lot of we need to have better leadership training. Leadership, I wrote the book to make it very tangible. I also made it to be very accessible, because we can absolutely learn leadership, but it really can't be taught. You need someone who's really interested in becoming a leader, because you have to take in some information, digest it, play with it, have that interest, have that curiosity, and ultimately have some courage to apply it. So I always, it can be absolutely learned. It's hard to teach. And so by writing the book, knowing that it really, a successful personal career, a successful career within an organization, and certainly a successful organization, absolutely needs leadership. And I wanted to make it very tangible, not only at a leadership level, but really because we have so many things that are going on with technology and consolidation, and there's a lot of pressures. I termed it next level because we need to rise above all of these different aspects that are happening. But to answer your question specifically, really to make it more tangible, make it digestible so people can sit with it and really elevate their personal leadership, their team leadership, and ultimately I work with organizations the most, so organizational leadership.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into some of those kind of tangible results. And really, one of the big themes of the book is the teams. I mean, the importance of teams in today's workplace. And you introduce the essential team success ecosystem in the book. So, talk about how this framework helps AEC firms to build stronger, more effective teams.
Yeah, so teams, you nailed it. I mean, really, the crux of the book is building better systems and building better teams. And, a team being a system to produce things. And the team, I mean, what I wanted to really get across with the team success ecosystem is team success itself is an outcome. We can't just turn that on. And our success really is tied to the systems within the organization. And, the phrase that's said a lot different ways, but basically your current systems are perfectly designed to continue to deliver your current results. So there's so many different aspects to unpack in that. And so it's not just systems, they're complex systems. They involve humans, they involve different elements. And it's not just complex systems, they're ecosystems because there's nutrient flows, right? And there's energy flows, right? Literally and figuratively throughout organizations. So it really is to think in terms of complex ecosystems, but the team component is very essential for that. And really, in many ways, I call it directly this in the book, it's what I call it the non-obvious obvious. That when we can understand teams and team success, it really is this sort of beautiful platform for individual connection and contribution, that individuals feel connected the most in whatever size or organization is. They feel connected on the team and they're able to contribute on the team with the team. But organizationally, it's also this substructure for organizational growth and prosperity, that it is through the work of our teams and ultimately from an organizational design and development perspective, how do we become a high functioning team of high performing teams? That's ultimately the goal. Again, no matter what size our organization is, we're probably having multiple teams involved. And to go just a little deeper, one of the reasons I focus on teams and have a whole, like the heart of the book is on team design and success, because the vast majority of us don't know how to design teams and don't know how to thrive on high functioning teams. And there's some backstory behind that. I mean, any of us who have been in the profession for, 30 to 40 years, certainly know this, but and those coming in, that was sort of the start of the era of more for less. And for a lot of reasons, and we're not bad people, we didn't do anything wrong, but the era of AEC have moved us from what used to be more teamwork to what I call superheroes. And a lot of times with the era of more for less through the 90s and the 2000s and recessions and slow to hires, and there's whole backstory behind that, we became not only superheroes, but superheroes on a hamster wheel. A lot of us do a lot of the things ourselves, and we've been forced to do that. We really don't know how to delegate. We're the sort of the heroes, and we have some helpers that maybe do some things if we have time to delegate to them. And so that is an issue that there's a lot of kind of unlearning and relearning and how to really operate in a team atmosphere. The other element that really is driving today is we have kind of a shape problem with our profession because of the Great Recession 10, 15 years ago now, that there's a lot of younger folks who would have come into the industry at the time that would have 10 to 15 years worth of experience that just aren't here. And so in terms of demographics, our shape as an industry, and it reflects itself in many organizations, is there's a lot of people with north of 20 years experience who again have been raised in a system of superheroes. And there's a lot of people with 10 or so less years experience who are desperate to learn how to do things. And those that are on the other end of the spectrum have been forced to do it ourselves. And so really kind of moving into that team atmosphere opens up the door for, number one, learning how to operate with folks. It takes us away from old school delegation and really more into agile design, because a lot of the high performing organizations that I work with have shifted into more agile design, working along with, not delegating away, not taking away people's identity and trying to teach someone 3 levels below you, 5 levels below you how to do something that we could delegate it to ourselves 15 years ago and would be probably disappointed with the results, right? And that's us. And we're as good as we are, right? We just don't have that 15 years experience difference. So I mean, I said a lot there, and I don't know if there's anything you want to unpack, but there's a reason why a focus on teams and systems is a differentiator that I see in my lens across the country, across different size organizations, different disciplines. Really the lens for the book, it's 3 years in the writing, really what I see separating the highest achieving organizations versus those in crisis. And those are the firms I typically tend to work for, the high achievers and the ones in crisis, and all incredibly, gifted, high moral, high ethical professionals. It's just some are making decisions that lead to high performance, and some are making decisions a lot of times in terms of busyness that are leading more towards crisis. And so there's really this is the difference. Thinking in terms of systems and thinking and operating in a better way in terms of teams.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. A couple of things. First thing I want to say is for our listeners is that when Pete talks about burnout, he experienced it firsthand. His first book was Reverse Burnout, which we've had him on the podcast a while ago to talk about as well. So that comes from experience, and a lot of people still are experiencing that today. But I want to go back to one of the first things you said, Pete, which I think is really important, where you said something along the lines of, the success of the individual is very dependent on the systems in place in that organization, right? And the team that they're coming into. I think that that's something that people just don't put enough stock in today, right? Hey, we're going to hire this new person. They're great. They're going to come in here and they're going to be super successful, right? Well, what are they coming into, right? And how are they set up for success? And a really good analogy for this is, if you think about sports, it's like in the NFL, right? This guy, Pat Mahomes, is like generational. Guys won like 3 Super Bowls at a very young age. And the question I hear all the time is, if like a different team drafted him, with different coaches and a different system, would he still be as successful, right? He happens to be one of the best coaches of all time, one of the best systems of all time. The answer is probably no. And so my point is that, bringing someone, having the right systems in place, having good habits in place, having a good culture in place is what's going to create that team dynamic, and what's going to be able to, and then to bring someone in and onboard them into that is what's critical. We're seeing that here at EMI when we bring someone, that whole onboarding process and fitting them in is so important. And so I would imagine that what you've seen from your experience is that ecosystem, if you will, can make or break an individual.
Oh, absolutely. I spent a lot of time in the book talking about culture, but not just culture. Again, I try to break it down. It's not like, oh, we should have culture. It's culture at 3 different levels in the organization. It's culture that is the thriving culture as the output, the outcome that sort of drives so much within the organization, and really break that down. But that is part of the system. And I have a graphic in the book, which is, basically, our highest performers will be eventually beat down by a poor system, because it's just going to eat away. Now, for a while, you can rise above, you can do different things. At the same time, if we can build better systems, let alone great systems, right? But there's no reason we can't have great systems. We don't need the highest performers. We just need willing performers, because the system, again, the individual role in success is absolutely there as a professional. Like, you can't rely on the team. Like, you've got a role on the team. The team has a role within the organization. But if the systems are set up to support it, you really can thrive. And if the systems are set up to eat away, it will just eventually beat down. And the people who leave first are the A players, because they have options. And so one, again, major differentiator I see is understanding that the systems are very important, and our grit, our ad hocness, our, brute force will get us through the moment, but that's not sustainable and it's not going to be scalable as an organization. And that's just, again, but there are those moments for sure, but that's not how to build an organization. So I agree on culture, but again, culture comes from somewhere, and because culture is an outcome, just like growth and profitability, like you can't turn those on. A thriving culture, growing as an organization in a very healthy way, having profitability, those are just things that are things done well over time create those. So you can't just turn those on. So how do we, from a leadership perspective, personally and organization, create those outcomes that then drive further outcomes?
Yeah, and I guess one way to kind of wrap this part of it up is a good player in a great system is going to work. An amazing player in a bad system is not going to work. And that's, I think the problem is people go for the latter a lot of the time because they want that A+ person, but they're not really set up to help them be successful. And that's problematic. So, Pete, what's the most common mistake that AEC leaders make when they're shifting from the traditional management of more of like a me management, as opposed to a team-driven leadership approach like you talk about in the book?
Well, I mean, the first sort of flaw I see is thinking that we really understand teams. I mean, we've said teams forever, but really, and what I tried to break down in the book is what it takes to design and operate successfully with teams. There's just so many different components, and not, and there are elements that, oh, I've heard of that before. Yes, but now apply it. And so there is this sort of, if we approach it with the just do it like I did it before, just do it like we did it before, it's not teamwork in almost every organization that I've been with. So the first is approach it with that humility to say, maybe we don't quite understand how teams can work and how they should work. And so that's why I try to break it down into 10 steps. Now, that's the what. The how you do it, I mean, there's some magic involved, right? There's the mechanics. I mean, what we need to do mechanically, we probably can figure out or know. How you pull it off is sort of, I put it in the magic part. And that's really that humility to approach it, and really the leadership that's necessary to create the system that has the team success in it. So I think, it is being able to take the time to learn something new and have the courage to apply it is a differentiator. I mean, and that is just, it's incredible when people say, our leadership is willing to try something new. It really encourages and it brings people aboard. And if you're trying something new, right, it takes the guard down and no one's expecting perfection. So I would say if you're going to do something different and moving into a true team success is different, you have to approach it that you don't know it yet. Even if, oh yeah, I do kind of know parts of this, mostly we don't know it. So I think it's that humility is the first element, but none of this is complicated. There's a lot of complexity, and I talk about this in the book. There's complexity, it's dynamic, it's multidimensional, it's multi-layered, but it's not complicated. But we do have to approach things very differently. And again, thinking we've already done this is sort of a recipe for failure. And as it relates to, I'll say this too, as it relates to a lot of what I'm involved with, really organizational design and development, when we're going to make the leap towards next level leadership, and we're going to make the leap towards really high performing teams and ideally a team of high functioning, high performing teams, slow is fast. And so thinking we can just do this right away and be done with it is a recipe for not being successful and really kind of undermining our leadership moving forward, because the next thing we'll try to get done quickly, people will discount what we say. And so candidly, it really is this: take some time, slow is fast. When we understand all the different elements, not only what to do, but how to do it in your organization for who you have for this day and time. Then when we're ready to launch something and we do it, it sticks. And so it's fast, but taking the time up front to really understand it, again, I wouldn't say it's slow, but I say it for, not just jump right in and think you know it, is a real difference. And that sort of, again, there's that the maturity of the organization to say what the sustainable and effective growth that we really want, it's not quite where we want. The profitability might not be where we want it. The having not only engaged employees, but we want opted in employees, because really the notion of employee engagement is pretty antiquated now. That's not going to drive your success. Having engaged employees, you need opted in employees. And then is our culture as thriving and supportive as it needs to be? And as you mentioned, are our teams performing? All of that just takes a little bit of time to really think through how we can sort of move into this direction. And those, again, they're going to take a little time because they're systematic outputs and outcomes. None of what we really want in an organization is something you can just turn on. It's not an input. It's not an activity. It's either an output or an outcome. And those happen as part of a system. And these systems are not complicated, but we just have to see the systems and then be able to approach them. So long story, just a little longer, thinking that we can just do one or two things and get completely different outcomes is just not that formula.
Yeah, and I like the idea of slow is fast when it comes to that. In fact, I'm reading Cal Newport's new book right now, Slow Productivity, and he titled it that way because, we've come to believe that productivity is like a synonym of fast, right? Like we just think that if you're going to be productive, it means you have to be fast. And his whole theory in the book is going slow, you can be more productive, kind of shadowing some of the things that you just said in terms of team building, which I think is a really good and important approach. And so you talked,
that's a great
about a lot of
point,
stuff.
just drilling on that, because productivity isn't just
Yeah,
activity. Productivity is activity that produces value, right? And value is
results
an
and value. Yeah.
Right. And so you can't just turn on value. You can turn on activity, you can't turn
Exactly.
on value.
Exactly. We've just been trained to say, how many things can I get done today? Right. But we're not thinking about, to your point, what is the value that those things are generating? Right. Like one thing could generate more value than 10 things. It just depends on what one thing you select. So I want to go back again to, you talked about burnout a little bit in the beginning and all the things that are going on in the industry. And, if the listeners here are leaders in firms and they have to think about everything we're talking about and distill it and use it, one of the challenges that they're going to face is, balancing the growth of their firm while avoiding burnout for them and for other professionals there. So what strategies can you recommend to help these leaders, retain talent and create this kind of thriving culture that we've been describing here without overextending themselves and others? Because it seems like it's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, burnout's an interesting, so burnout, is just different. It's got, for an analogy used by Dr. Christina Maslach, who's done a lot of workplace work, burnout, there's a canary in the coal mine aspect, right? There's an individual component. Certain people are more prone to it. Your highest achievers, your people who are most dedicated to the clients, dedicated to the project. They're going to be more apt to burn out, right? So that's the canary. The other aspect of the coal mine is no matter how healthy people are, right? If you go into an unhealthy coal mine, I get the healthy coal mines, but an unhealthy coal mine, they're going to get sick. So there is this, from an individual perspective, what is driving burnout today is different than, I'll say, pre-COVID burnout, right? Pre-COVID, overwork was the issue, right? Not knowing about it, not talking about it. Overwork drove burnout. Today, I see something different. Our highest achievers are not letting themselves burn out because of overwork, but they do burn out with overwork that's misaligned. And even if it's not overwork, if we're just doing work that is misaligned with us, misaligned with what our work goals are, our life goals now, and the role we want to have in our business, misalignment drives a lot of leadership burnout today. from an organization perspective, I mean, you say growth, I mean, there's all kinds of great, healthy, sustainable growth that happens that creates opportunities for people. People can align behind that. If organizationally we're just growing because we said we should grow, because some outside force told us we need to grow, that's almost a recipe for misalignment at anyone outside of the ownership principal ranks. So I said a little bit there, but when we think about burnout, there is this individually and then there's the organizationally. And again, it's important to sort of think about it in those senses, but I see it different today. I burned out pre-COVID, but there's some of our highest achievers aren't unless there's misalignment.
Yeah, I like what you said there around, I think one big takeaway from that is every firm today seems like they want to grow as fast as possible and as big as possible. But I think maybe to your point, they should stop and ask why and how big, right? Why are we on this growth path? How big are we going to go? And what impacts is that going to have on our organization and our people if we continue to go at the rate we're going? Because if you're going to try to grow in a healthy way and allow people to have enjoyable careers in your organization and not get overextended, you can't have everything, right? There's got to be some give and take there, and you've got to take a look at that in a healthy way. And I think most companies just put the pedal on the gas and say, grow, grow, grow type of thing. And then, obviously there's other issues in our industry around this with private equity getting involved and really trying to accelerate growth in different ways. But I do think that maybe the root of this whole idea of balancing growth versus burnout is examining the growth goals, right? Why am I doing it? How big are we getting? What do we want to grow for? Before you just go blindly, like you're saying, just put the blinders on and grow.
Well, I talk about it in the book, the 5 things that only leaders can and must do. I mean, number 1 is what's the vision for the firm? Why are we existing? What are we trying to do? 2 is opportunity. Like, what is the opportunity towards that? And do we have people bought in? Are we bringing in people? And so a lot of that ties to what your growth, objectives are. And growth is beautiful. I mean, it creates opportunities for so many of us, but it's the unrestrained growth. I mean, Jim Collins talked about it 20 years ago with, why the mighty fall, right? It's untethered growth for growth's sake. It's because we've had success, we want more of it. And the more growth starts the decline, right? So that's sort of and we've known that for a long time, right? So there's an unsatiable desire for growth, the hubris that comes from it. It's not necessarily turning a flywheel, right? Jim Collins' language. It's not part of the systems don't support it. It is the second stage of failure of a company, right? And we've known this for a while. Again, it ties into some of the system work. The other thing is, growth and burnout, right? If we are the hero, if we have we built our organization based on heroes and maybe worse, like the hero on the hamster wheel, the hero with helpers,
Right.
You're more apt to have people burn out, right? But even if it's productive, healthy, sustainable growth, but if we shift to teams and team success and we have a number of heroes that have different roles and functions on teams, and 1 + 1 = 4, right? We have the sum is better than all its parts. We can actually have high levels of growth, but it is easily absorbed because the team is set up for it. So again, there's different aspects. And if we understand the systems in the organization and we build high functioning teams that know how to produce, we can see a lot more growth and have a lot more success without the burdens on the superheroes. And so there's, again, different ways to unpack that. And again, I lived it a certain way, I experienced it. I see firms experiencing that today, but then I see the other side with the really high performing organizations who are seeing a lot of growth and seeing a lot of success, not just profitability, but what I call prosperity, which is profitability plus a thriving culture. If we design for growth and prosperity, you sort of have to bring the culture along with the profitability. So, but again, there's different aspects and it doesn't take much to look under the hood to really kind of see that how we can do it better is evident, but we have to be able to think in terms of systems and teams and, not just, it's either we're going to grow a lot and then have the problem of burning out. Well, not necessarily. Both, and that's one element with, I'll say this, with thinking about things differently in terms of teams and systems, we're enter a world very quickly of both and, not either or, but our more traditional systems of heroes and hamster wheels and growth, because that's the way we always do it. 15% a year times, 5 years is doubling the company. Like just those, and we'll assume the workforce will be there, right? All of those things, those old, more traditional ways of doing things, that's really either or. And it's just a different mindset today. And again, taps into not just systems, but more ecosystems. And that is, again, when I'm making that term up, it works in nature, right? I mean, it is just, we're taking that analogy and turning it in directly to business.
Yeah, absolutely. And so building on that, one of the things we talked a lot about in the last few minutes there was like this idea of vision, right? Planning, thinking ahead for your company and how you want to grow and why you want to grow. So let's talk about that for a minute, because you mentioned earlier on that you do strategic planning, but maybe not like in the traditional way that it's been done. How can AEC leaders kind of rethink their approach to strategic planning to ensure that they're going to get long-term success in the evolving industry and climate that we're in today?
Yeah. I mean, there's overall, there's the more traditional way, but there's different ways to look at, what is our vision? I mean, what problems are we solving for society? I mean, especially in kind of the built infrastructure. I mean, so a little bit more about, well, we want to serve our clients and be the firm of choice. Like those types of things are, okay, great. That's on the way towards something. So really thinking of what is our contribution is pretty powerful. Again, that alignment of why we're doing this. So, but then breaking that down to, what do we want? Some of the pillars of our organization. What is our vision in terms of market? Right? Where are we what? And that's kind of the mission. Who are we serving? Why are we serving that? What on route to our mission? And what is our vision for people? Like, how do we want to help? We want people to thrive at work, life, and business? What are we doing with them, right? And then practice, like, how do we use some of the tools? What are our work systems? What do we think about AI? Are we the tool for it? Or is it a tool for us? Like, what's number one here? Like, what's the prize is the professional and the technology is the tool? Or is it someone else where we're just the tools working for somebody? So what is our practice vision? And you can work through that, really spending time on the culture tied to values and how do you want to work? Not what do you want to do, but then how do you want to do it? What do you want to be known for? So that's a key aspect of what this is upstream of the traditional strategic planning. And you can't just use benchmarks for this stuff, right? That's last year's, that's the old traditional way to do things, right? We're moving into a very different era. The other thing is really think about our systems. What is our practice model? What is our business model? What is our reward, recognition, and compensation models, right? We don't think about that, but that's a driver of so much. And it ties into some of these elements of business success, but we don't normally think about that. And so that's a key aspect of how I see things moving forward. But again, it's part of slow is fast, but I'll say this is the work I do is upstream of the traditional strategic planning. And there's a lot of, you're not getting this done in a weekend. It's like the quintessential, we'll call a couple of clients, we'll do an employee survey, and then we'll all get together and, by the end of the second day, we have this plan. I mean, it doesn't work that way. Well, it doesn't work from a next level organizational perspective, a next level leader, transitioning the organization perspective. There absolutely are critical milestones and retreats are important, but there's a lot of work before that. There's a lot of work after that. And you can use these events to do a lot of good, but typically not answering those big questions in a weekend. We just know it. And again, tie into traditionally, the 40-year-old process, the 50-year-old process, right? I mean, 90% of those languish and fail. And again, I look at it as the one who used to pay for this stuff. And have people come in, and sometimes we try to do it ourselves. And I kind of look at the best of, like, what do we really need to accomplish? Why do we need to do it? because games are changing. We don't just need game plans. We need to figure out what game we're playing. And then even if we know what game we're playing, we have a game plan. It really is about what are we doing to execute? And that's a whole different dimension that is the focus of my third book, but we can't get there until we have next level leadership nailed. That whole, how do we go to strategically advance the firms, bring our generations together? Because it's very clear the highest performing organizations have figured it out. The ones struggling still have sort of the language issues. And so to be able to think about that up front is going to be very good in terms of, in the most rapid way possible, getting things done. You got to spend that time up front.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big takeaway for me from that is you need to do your strategic planning more from the inside out, right? Like, what are our systems like? How are we taking care of our people? How are we giving them career pathways? As opposed to how much revenue can we make? How many offices do we want to open up, right? How many clients can we get? And so I think you really need to think through, your internal, like you said, like you've been saying the whole time, your systems, right? What's your ecosystem? How are you setting people up for success going forward? And I would agree that people probably look at the opposite of that in a lot of these textbook strategic planning processes that have been used in our industry over the last, 30 years or whatever the case may be. So I think that would be an interesting
add
change.
to what you just said. I mean, some of the traditional things, right? That is a component. It's just not the only thing, right? I mean, the reason is like what do we want? What's the impact we want to have? How big do we want to be? I mean, because there's these aspirations, there's these goals. If we're really good at what we do, why would we rob the world of it, right? So there is this approach, right? And again, this is both and. We want that. And I talk about it in the book. I have a whole chapter dedicated to tension and pressure and high performance and harmony, because there is this, when we understand where we want to go, well, we're here now, right? So what are the systems producing? How do we need to adjust the systems to then meet these different goals and outcomes? And so, I mean, ultimately, and I use the analogy in the book, like a bridge, and it's perfect for civil engineers. I mean, we don't try to remove tension and pressure from our organization. We just try to manage it and understand it and leverage it. Just like you don't remove tension and pressure from a bridge. Is massive tension and pressure throughout a bridge. It's just balanced and designed, right? Because that's the only way it takes us from here to there, where otherwise we would never go. And so it's really kind of thinking of those forces, but ultimately getting the design right and the alignment. Even if the bridge is a little different and we're going to build one bridge and then we're going to build a second bridge. So again, think about it as and both, either or. Yeah, you could have a plan. It's just nobody wanting to follow it. And if you do too much internally, well, what are our people going to do? I don't know. People are starving for leadership, right? Those in our organization don't know. They don't have the line of sight. There are people who have certain line of sights that they do want to be led. And if we do see something incredible, it's our job. Again, get back to those 5 things only leaders can do. I mean, it is this vision. It is articulating the opportunity. It's getting people to buy in. It's executing on the strategy, and it's making it a win-win for people. And so all of it is just, it's beautiful when it happens. And to me, it's tragic when it doesn't, because we just fallen into some of the old traditional patterns and this is the way we do it because I need to fit y'all into a weekend. And it's just, even again, is there good? Yeah, there's always some good that comes out of it. Is it as good as it could be? No. Is it the best it can be? Absolutely not.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it'll be evolving, but I think that there is things that we need to focus on more today than we used to. That's for sure.
And that's one thing about kind of leadership too. So much is expected out of leaders. And it gets into, I talk about this for changing broad ecosystems, right? People learn about what happens back in the day, right? I mean, you only kind of knew what happened in your organization. You know what's happening in other people's organizations. There was a lot of pressure on leadership. And I mean, Anthony, you and I are going to get into this when we start, breaking into the analysis of the data. But one of the things I saw, what we the questions that we ask, are you are you considering leaving your organization? Ineffective leadership teams in the last few years has broken into the top 10, been number 7, tied for number 3 last year. This year, just looking at it's number 2. It's the second reason people cite for considering leaving their current employer. It's listed as one of the top reasons people burn out. Leadership is so important today, and so much more is expected out of leaders. And we can't, even if we're an incredible practitioner, we have to learn to lead our organizations. And that doesn't mean we have to be a different personality. It just means we have to operate differently, see things differently, do some things differently. But it's an incredible opportunity. But there's absolutely more to deal with. Again, strategic planning, because we were talking about that. It used to be just what are our revenue goals and assume that people would come and the people would stay. There's not just the market forces, right? There's the practice forces and there's the people forces. And then there's what is our systems forces? What are they producing today? We have to maybe revamp that. And then there's a lot that gets into another major element is our ability to communicate. That was not on the radar. I don't know, maybe we'll send a pitch at the barbecue. Like, it's just so much more. And ultimately, the communication, if everything else goes well, one of the single biggest differentiators I see across organizations, again, assuming you have something to communicate, is communication. That our inability to communicate, even when there's great stuff, might as well not have the great stuff. But obviously, if we don't have great stuff, we're not going to talk about it. So ultimately, it's communication. But that's sort of towards the end of the road.
So the last question that I want to ask you, Pete, is you just talked again about how critical leadership is today in our environment. I mean, that's why people are leaving their organizations, because of bad leadership. So based on the consulting work you've done, based on writing the book, what would you say is one kind of overlooked leadership skill that AEC professionals should prioritize to help drive their own success and their firm's success?
Well, so the last chapter is dedicated to what a next level leader looks like. And I've actually, over the years, developed what I call the top 10 performance differentiators and created an assessment of we can kind of figure ourselves on a spectrum. Again, none of us are perfect. None of us are magical. We operate on a spectrum. Sometimes because we're busy, we might slide on the spectrum a little bit. And so there is all of that. But one of the things I talk about after that, 8 essential power skills and habits. And to kind of walk through those and, kind of start, critical and strategic thinking skills. But the last power habit opens the door for everything else. And it's time management. When we can understand that, when we understand how we use our time and are we doing it effectively, right? I mean, to say we're too busy is a red flag. To say we're too busy to invest in the future is a red flag. To say we're too busy thinking about the future to understand our systems of today is a red flag. It's both, right? So understanding how we use our time, are we using it effectively? It opens up the door for every other power skill and opens up the door for all of our ability to connect with people, to see what's happening in our organization. Until we get the time thing right, most everything else is a hope, even if we want it to happen. So I'd say that really critical time management, and I'd go one step further, time and energy management, because our enthusiasm as leaders is either contagious or undermining. And so that's a skill that I see that unlocks everything. And even if we intellectually know everything and should be doing things, our inability to do them usually comes down to time.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And I would just echo that and add to that. When it comes to time management, what I've seen with a lot of AEC leaders is prioritizing. So they're perfectly fine with rolling up their sleeves and working, but are they working on the right things? And I think that understanding what's going to move the needle for your organization, I always go back to the 80-20 principle. There's like 20% of your things you're working on are going to drive 80% of your company's success. Are you picking those 20%, or are you lost in the other 80% of things that are kind of more busy work and are checking boxes? And so we all have the same amount of time. Everybody works a lot of hours in a week, but the people that can work on the right things have a lot more leverage and probably can do a lot better when it comes to time management, like Pete is describing. And so,
Yeah. And
I want to just
add
take
one.
it. Okay, Pete.
Oh, sorry. If I add one thing to that, what you said, 100% agree. If we think of things in terms of systems, the leaders own the inputs. Who are we hiring? Who we doing work for? What technology are we using? But so inputs, leaders have to own. That's the leverage point. And then the outcomes. What does growth look like? Why are we growing? What does profitability look like? What does the thriving culture look like? So the leveraged activities, but then the middle piece is that, there's the activities and the outputs. That's our management hat. Sometimes that's our busy hat. That's our urgent. There's a client just called. There's a problem on a problem. We shift to that management mode. And it's not only what our priorities are, but as a leadership, and I talk about this in the book, our priorities, right? Yes, there is these urgent moments we have to jump into practitioner mode or manager mode. Absolutely. Manage the day, win the day. You don't have tomorrow to win the day. But when we have something important to do, part of that 20% is, are the inputs into the system working? Are they are the quality ingredients, right? Is it not the garbage in garbage? Like if it's that, and then what is the system set up to produce? That's, if we're looking at that again, I want to leverage in the system because it's not just the priority. It is, but in a leadership world, it's the inputs and the outcomes have to be owned by leaders because nobody else can do that. And that's, again, none of this stuff is super complex, but we have to see it. And that's why I call it I mentioned this before, but I don't know if I punched the point on it. There's several things that are non-obvious, obvious, that it's not obvious until we say it, until we read it, or until we experience it. But then when we see it, oh, that's pretty obvious now. Now let's just go do it. Let's figure out how to do that. And that's, again, part of the reason I wanted to get this stuff down, because if there's a profession that can figure out how to do this fast in the right way, right? Slow is fast, but do it fast, is engineers and architects. We are problem solvers. We just have to know what is the problem we're solving for. And that's why I love our profession and just incredible, upstanding people. My personal little mark I want to make here is, let's look at the problem differently so we can solve it differently, and then move on to the incredible things that we do for society.
Well, he is Pete Atherton, author of Next Level Leadership, How to Build and Leverage Your Essential Team Success Ecosystem. You can learn more about Pete, his book, his podcast, his blog at actionsprove.com. He's also extremely active on LinkedIn. And Pete, as always, we want to thank you for coming on the podcast, sharing some of what you've learned over the years related to leadership from your own career and from the work that you've been doing as a management and leadership consultant. So thank you so much for spending some time with us on the podcast and taking us through the book.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Pete. He's awesome. He's built so much knowledge from his own career and from doing the management and leadership consulting. We were thrilled to have him. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out episodes like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I hope to see you next week.